Hi, back to the Not Mom conversation. It's Karen Malone Wright, the founder and executive voice of the NotMom.com, and my partner Laura Lavoie. Laura's sitting in it, beautiful Asheville, and ready to join us in a conversation about today's world, which is upside down and roundabout, and the idea of race, culture, and women without children. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Karen, I love that we're doing this. This is fantastic. But I also want to start out the show to kind of remind people about our code of conduct. So I figure now is a good time to do that. The Not Mom has some pretty important rules. We are a welcoming space. We listen to, encourage, and embrace women without children by choice or by chance. And many of our friends are moms, so mean girl terms to describe people, women, children, and not moms living a different not mom experience is completely unacceptable. So we want to say that, but we also want to encourage everybody to join in on the conversation in the comments. So yeah, that's great. And we're about to welcome our guest, Dr. Kimya Dennis. Let me add Kimya to the screen.
How are you doing?
Kimya, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Hey. So we thought we would give you a chance to introduce yourself. Tell us, who you are, what you do, and why you're here, other than you're a friend of the Not Mom and we love you.
Yeah, I love you too. So I'm Kimya Dennis. I'm an activist, sociologist, and criminologist. I am permanently child-free by choice, and I conducted the first known study solely with child-free by choice people of African diaspora, and I created and taught the first known college child-free course. And I'm no longer a professor. I founded 365 Diversity LLC, in which I do research-based trainings and changes to all aspects of schools, organizations, and businesses.
And
so thank you for having
me. You are located.
Thanks for being with me.
I now live in Baltimore, so I'm born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. I lived in North Carolina for 17 years. I escaped, and now I live in Baltimore.
Good on you, Toby.
Exactly.
Well, the way we got here today, Kimya, is that our last episode of the podcast and conversation was with Maxine Trump, whose documentary To Kid or Not to Kid is, being seen around the world. And Laura and I were discussing and sort of laughing about how I have a part of the film, a statement I made that was somewhat in jest, but somewhat very, very honest, where I said that as the world continues to almost regress in its racial relations, that I not only wish I already was a childless by chance woman who still, wishes she had had a child. But as I look at Black, white issues, Native American, any kind of issues that concern race, I imagine that, of course, if I had had a child, my child would be the next generation of soldiers out there. And I said in the film, To Kid or Not to Kid, that at times I sort of feel like I let Martin Luther King Jr. down, that my generation was among those lucky enough to have been born when integration was still a goal of America, of much of America. And my childhood in an integrated neighborhood where, whites actually wanted to live there with blacks and wanted their kids to get to know children of other races, and now would be probably laughed at as just a fountain of liberalism. But that was a very special time for me, and I think it would have made my child special. The truth that I know is nobody knows what their child's going to grow up to be like. But just that whole idea that every time Maxine shows her film, and I've seen it now 4 times with an audience, and when that part airs of me saying that about I've let Martin Luther King Jr. down, people laugh hard. And I said to Laura, I wonder what Kimya would think about that. With all of her studies, of brown women of all types and childlessness, if you understand what I was trying to say about culture and wishing that I at least would leave this earth knowing there was one little human who gets it. And I put that little human there.
Yeah. So first of all, I really missed the Not Mom Summit. I still wear the T-shirts and I talk about it every day. So I'm still, keeping my eyes open for us to bring that back. So let me know how I can help, all that wonderful stuff. So when you bring up Martin Luther King, the version that is taught in schools, the white version, is the version of "We shall overcome. We're all in this together." The version that I was taught, because I was raised by two Black parents who are social scientists and activists. So they taught us the real Martin Luther King and the real of all of these people, including Tony Brown and all of them, which is challenging all aspects of the establishment. It's not just white people wanting to live with us. The question is, why do we want white people to live with us? Like, why is everything based on us wanting white people to agree? So I was raised in an environment where it's not about us being desperate to be accepted by white people. So I'm child-free by choice. Thankfully, I'm permanently as such. And if I had a child, I would have raised them in the same kind of environment in which it was not about white people having to like you. It's not about celebrating you being welcomed into a white neighborhood, that kind of thing. So when we talk about what's happening in 2020 United States of America, what bothers me the most is when people are acting shocked at what's happening.
Yeah.
Around the world and in America. I'm like, that annoys me the most as a Black woman, as a social scientist. I always tell people your selective vision is not reality. As Blacks, our existence is not based on whether white people wake up. And these are white people who are teaching children. These are white people who are writing textbooks, who are publishers for the textbooks, who are the taxpayers and voters in these school systems, including the predominantly Black schools that I attended, K through 12 in Richmond, Virginia. These are white people who consider themselves in charge of what's going to be factual and what's going to be discussed. And this is what every generation of children is learning, regardless of who their parents are. The things I know now, my brothers and I would not have learned this if our parents were not activists and Black social scientists. We would have been stuck in what was taught at these schools. Even though they were predominantly Black schools, it was 100% based on what white people approved. And so that's what I want people to understand in 2020 and beyond. All these Black Lives Matter protests, all these Black Lives Matter paintings mean nothing unless we're gonna stop accepting white people's excuses and white people's apologies. And that includes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Now I was gonna say that includes in the child-free community, because child-free community is just like any other white establishment where whites wanna present something as racially neutral. And when you mention race, they're like, wait a second, this has nothing to do with race. And if white people say it, then darn it, it's true. Miss Karen, you were going to ask me something.
No, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, I can listen to you all day, but I was just going to get you to do what you did, which was to link that back to NotMom.
Yeah.
And so one of the things Laura and I talked about was, how does childlessness change from ethnic group to ethnic group? Is it, and in today's world, does the kind of comment I made about, gee, I wish I regret not teaching a child what I have learned over the years and sending them out in the world, is that same kind of thinking going on among Native American not moms and Asian not moms? And, certainly we know African women have a totally different experience than American women without children in so many different countries. But you are the scholar, so I just, was interested in your thoughts.
Well, thank you for calling me scholar. But I will say, though, based on our personal experiences, right, this is something that we always want to highlight. what does it mean where you're in a space where everyone is united based on not having a child? It varies by circumstance, of course. But then what does it mean when we now say, okay, there are racial differences in this. There are ethnic differences. There are language differences. There are country of origin differences. There are religious differences. That's when a lot of child-free and childless environments get uncomfortable. Because what they want is for us to make this a subtopic. Like you see, there's more and more writings now about non-white Hispanics who are child-free by choice, all sorts of stuff. So when you look at the mainstream child-free networks, they celebrate it. They're like, yeah, look at this new writing. But still, the mainstream child-free networks are still intentionally white. Like they're intentionally white. And I think back to, was it last year, before white people banned me from Facebook, I remember reading, I forget what child-free Facebook page it was, but they were celebrating Ariana Grande because she did something, whatever. And I says, well, okay, so since you brought her up, let's talk about how she's a cultural appropriator, right? Like her skin tans, her hairstyles. That's not her. That's what her manager and all of them told her to do so she can make rap videos and have Black folks celebrate her. And it's supposed to be that mystical, what race is she kind of thing. So the moment I mentioned that, that's when the white child-free people ran in calling me racist, because, you know, when we're talking about white supremacy, whites love to own the word racist and call us racist, right? And that's when I followed up with that and made that YouTube video. Because that experience is when I announced that I'm no longer aligning with these child-free spaces. Because these spaces are not for all of us. It's just like any other white dominant space where we are accepted as long as we go with their program. As long as we discuss the topics that the whites in the space want to discuss and discuss it exactly how they want it to discuss, everything's fine. We can all just talk about whether we have children by choice or circumstance. The moment you talk about the other things that interlock with our lives, that's when a lot of these spaces get really uncomfortable. And that's why a lot of child-free people of various identities, including people with physical, mental conditions, are like, I take a bit from this space, but then I move on to other spaces because this space really does not want the full scope of what shapes my experience and my identity.
Absolutely. Laura, you got a question?
It's just listening to this, I don't know. That my thought is, and I remember when that happened, yeah, it bothered me a great deal. And I'm with you. I've left more child-free groups than I've stayed in because they're toxic. They're super toxic. But I guess the question I would have would be, what's next? What can we all do to increase the level of conversation that we're having with one another in child-free and NotMom spaces, but also reflecting not just one person's background?
Honestly, child-free spaces are just like every other predominantly white space. A lot of it's going to be a waste of time because Black and brown people are going to exhaust ourselves explaining everything for free. It's not like we're getting paid to do this. And it's the same as every other space where Black and brown people work someplace, or they might go to school someplace or whatever, and we're supposed to pretend that white people don't have access to books. Like, right. There's thousands of years of books. There's white people did not create universities, did not create technology, did not create science and mathematics and history. White people are big at like finding a book in somebody's basement that's dusty, and they're like, this is an antique. But here I am bringing up some research from like 50 years ago, and Black and white people are feeling some type of way. Like, that's old, get over it. And like, so is that antique. But it's about what you value and what you consider in terms of having a lasting impact. So if these predominantly white child-free spaces want to change, it's not going to be put on my list of to-dos, because I started this child-free research in 2013, and I remember Amy Blackstone, who I really appreciate so much, fellow sociologist, when
Amy.
Amy, shout out, woohoo! When Amy first advertised my research, the one people's response is, what does this have to do with race? So it just makes you wonder, who are we explaining for? Are we explaining this for our own people so that African diaspora child free understand that we are not alone? And when do we make sure that we're explaining this for our people without always being presented as explaining for whites? That's that thin line, because if whites want to read this information and reflect on the information, it should not then turn into Blacks and brown people always having to now explain it all. Because we've been explaining stuff for centuries, you know? We've been explaining stuff for centuries. And, you know, we can explain something for 2 hours in a training, and then right after the training, white people are like, I still don't understand. And that's the tactic that whites have used for 401 years in particular to distract Blacks. The idea is that whites want Black people to focus solely on white people, making sure white people understand something. And then white people want to, after all of that, say, well, I want to learn more. And it's that same thing over and over and over again. So that's why the work that I do with 365 Diversity LLC, it's not, I use the motto, I'm not your typical diversity training, because it's not about sitting around with a room full of white people and just telling you what to read. It's not just discussion. It's like, I explain this, now how are we going to change some policies and procedures? I do not allow distractions. And the same thing if we're talking about gender, sexuality, all these different identities that are underrepresented and marginalized. The power majority always wants to waste your time explaining stuff. You know, all these libraries, yes, it's white supremacist in terms of information provided, but there's billions of books. And then you want me to waste 3 hours for you at the end to say, well, I have more questions. No. And so child-free spaces are the same as any other space. That's the intentional tactic. And if we do not waste time explaining, that's when we're considered angry, hate white people. We don't want to collaborate. All those excuses used. And so I just tell people, I'm going to be the angry Black woman then, because I can't stand Blacks who are accommodating to whites to the point where nothing gets accomplished. You know, somebody has to be the one to tell white people, no, you already know, next step. And oftentimes that's me, and I'm fine with that.
Wow.
And I have colleagues who we do this work together, we collaborate together, and unfortunately, you know, the whole DEI, anti-racism, all these are catchwords, and so a lot of times people will warn people against me.
What's DEI?
So diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Ah, thank you.
So these are catchphrases, acronyms, and I tell people, look, even things like conflict race theory, all that, Black sociologists, Black activists have written about this for centuries, before you could find it in the library, a lot of times too. So I tell people there's a lot of stuff out there to read, like centuries of writing, if people care enough. But instead they want to come to us for the cliff notes, and especially for free. And those of us who don't provide that, we're evil and all that stuff. And so I just tell people, with this whole anti-racism, Black Lives Matter thing happening in the past few months, I want people to just watch out. Be careful not to fall for the money-making scheme. The money-making scheme is you're paying all these people for all these trainings, now there's certifications, all that stuff. And the idea is that you're going to keep spending money because those people know that they're not doing anything for that. And I want people to know that change has to be something that makes you uncomfortable. Like if white people leave a training and they're like, yeah, that was awesome, then nothing got accomplished. The same thing when we're talking about gender equity trainings. If cisgender people and men leave these trainings like, yeah, you said all the good stuff, then that means those people were not challenged.
I'm I'm in part I'm smiling because I could listen to you all day, and but in
It's so
also
funny.
in part you've sort of given me a hug about because of what I hoped the Not Mom would do when I started it, which was to acknowledge how different the experience of living a woman living a life without motherhood can be, depending on geography, but also depending on ethnicity. And for so long, since the start, I would post on our social networks stories from other countries. You know, I was personally appalled at the stories of murders of Indian women who, you know, once the husband finds out that, you know, she can't have children, he just kills her so he can remarry. And then I began to see those stories coming out of African nations. And then came the movie that I can't think of, Mother of George, I think, which was Ethiopia or Nigeria, and a whole story of how, because it was the man's fault of infertility, his mother insisted that his wife have sex with her brother just so that she could I mean, just bizarre kind of things. And I did that in hopes of opening everyone's eyes. I wasn't limiting it to white not moms. I wanted every woman without children, especially those who sort of feel sorry for themselves, to understand that it could be worse depending on where you live or what culture you were born into. But as I listened to you today, Kimya, I realized so much I believe, I think that much of the education to be done, the self-education to be done, may be a little rougher and tougher for the white women than brown women who already understand their own culture's pain. I don't know if I'm making sense with
Yes, I completely understand what you're saying. Thank you for saying that. So I will say Black and brown women often do not understand our pain because remember, we come from spaces in which our voices are very silenced and oftentimes harmed. That includes the United States of America. I mean, we can look at different examples where Black girls and Black women, and this is cisgender and transgender, are taught to always speak out in support of Black and brown boys and men and to not self-reflect and think about what are we feeling. So we could talk about that as pertains to health issues and everything. And so Black and brown women don't automatically know more about what's going on. But the difference in that is that white women oftentimes have more access to resources to learn more.
Hmm.
And that's that's an important challenge because white women are big at pretending that they are the creators of gender justice, right? We can look at the white version of feminism, the white version of women's suffrage, white women pretending that white supremacy was created by white men only. And this is white women across socio-political views and across political parties. It makes it very difficult to discuss racial injustice without at least one white woman running in and saying, wait a second, we're oppressed just like you are. Happens in every setting, right? And so it's a similar dynamic when we're talking about child-free and childless, because a lot of times it's white women who will steal the attention and make this somehow mysteriously about them being the spokesperson for the entire issue. And that oftentimes silences different experiences. So we all have something to learn about the vast span of humans for thousands of years and people in the United States of America for centuries. We all have something to learn because we have to remember a lot of facts are hidden because where are the books, right? Like a lot of stuff is spoken word for thousands of years and centuries. So unless it was written down, and then after you write it down, whose interpretation are you reading? So we all have new things to learn, but it's difficult to do so though if there's a particular group that's always in charge of the discussion. And they're given authority based on power, but also it's assumed that there's somehow an objective and neutral intellectual property. It's like they're saying it without being impacted by racial bias. That's a very common thing when we're talking about. It's similar to when men say that they can be the spokesperson of something because darn it, women, you're too emotional, whereas we men, we're objective voices. It's the same thing that happens when we're talking about race. And that's a similar dynamic as you see in child-free communities when white child-free women think that they're the spokesperson for liberation and anything else. And when you challenge that, it's the same routine of trying to make us the guilty ones for child abuse.
Okay. I got another question ready, but I don't want to keep stepping on Laura. So.
No, please do. No, Karen, I definitely want to hear what your next question is.
Well, my next question was, so much of what we've been talking about has been helping white women, white not moms, with their education issues when it comes to racial/gender issues, not mom issues. Mom versus not mom so often can include an element of race to it. But so what Laura and I have learned over the years with the NotMom.com and the summits is how many of us have other people's children in our lives. And I personally like to give those initial caps, other people's children, whether it's my neighbor's twins, who Laura has heard me just worry about every day because they just turned 7, 2 little dark-skinned black boys. And even though it's driving me crazy, and now there's a trampoline and a pool in the backyard next door to me, I would rather them be safe. I would rather them be in their own backyard during the pandemic and hatred. Anyway, all I'm trying to ask you is, as we interact with other people's children, nieces, nephews, goddaughters, godsons, the neighbors, children we teach. I've met so many childless and child-free pediatric nurses doing this website and doing these events. All these people who love children against all the stereotypes who say that, of course, we hate them. But at what point do we perhaps, when it comes to race, forget about worrying about the not mom friends and parents and worry more about that next generation? And how do we interact with other people's children to help them see us and open their eyes the way we pray their parents do? But not only about race, but also about childlessness and the decision to be parents.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. So I would just say it's a very gendered thing when women feel like we have to announce the children in our lives. So I tell people, if I did not have any children in my life, what you gonna say? I'm no longer a woman, right? Would you say I no longer had this body part in me that I had removed in a hysterectomy? So I always tell people we have to be careful when announcing the children in our lives and why we're doing it. Like my nieces and nephews, I have 5, they're grown now. They know I love them, but they knew from day one that Kimya was not having kids. and I actually spoke with all of my nieces and nephews. I've spoken with them about the choice not to have children. I teach that to Black children in particular. I teach that to Black children in communities. Now that's very difficult though, because most Blacks believe that is a form of genocide and ethnic cleansing. We talk about reproductive freedom, birth control, and all of that in Black communities. And I completely understand that because first and foremost, I am a Black woman. So I understand that. So I say all that because it's that balance between talking about what we want to teach children and trying to convince everyone that we don't hate children. I don't hate children. Do I love children? It depends on the child. Like I'm never going to pretend, look, I'm not a child person. So I just never pretend to be. Like I'm never, like even when I see a cute child, and I'm like, oh, you're cute. But if they have this puppy walking by, I'm like, oh my God, look at the baby. Oh my goodness. That's just me. So, and I think that we have to challenge the narrative that as women, we have to convince people somehow that, darn it, I'm not saying I'm against children. Instead, the topic is, how are we going to teach future generations, even if we don't always want to be around future generations, right? Like, how are we going to teach them, right? So when we say, I believe the children are the future, that don't mean you want them coming to your spot. You know, it's like they can be the future at home, right?
Laura, all day.
Please,
Yeah,
please
like,
no.
yeah. So as an activist in the Black community in particular, Black children, I love Black children in terms of being surrounded by change while also knowing that my piece is very important. So this is one thing I always tell child-free and childless people. It's like, do you have the ability to be in spaces with children and to teach children and to explain justice to children while also having the peace, if that's what you want, to escape?
Mm.
That's very important. I tell people, you know, I specialize in mental health, and mental health is so important to me, to know that you don't have to oppress your mind for the sake of proving to people that you love being around babies. You know what I'm saying? Like that's one thing we tell people all the time. Like, part of pronatalism is this idea that people, and particularly biological females and social girls and women, are supposed to just have horrible minds and horrible bodies, because all that matters is that you're there for those kids. And so we got to challenge that. Now, if we're talking about teaching children about racial justice for the future, that is absolutely impossible without dismantling the white supremacy of the adults. So it does not matter how many times I speak with children about racial justice, they're around adults, and this can include adults of various racial and ethnic identities, but especially when we're talking about white dominance, they're around adults who are telling them things that are oftentimes not factual, that oftentimes are based on fear tactics. There are white adults who are still teaching their children things like whites are just smarter. I remember when I first started my first semester in college, I still was back home in Richmond, Virginia. My very first semester, I was the only Black person or person who was Black or brown in any of my classes. And this young white man said to me that his father told him that whites are more successful because whites do better in school and whites work harder. And that's what people are teaching on and on again. And that's why we have to talk about this in terms of white power, not about evil white people. You know, it's not about evil white people. This image here, if you look at this, you see this, white people created white supremacy and it's their job to dismantle it.
Yes.
So there's the company that actually makes the t-shirts. So I ordered the t-shirts. When you order the t-shirt, you get the poster with it as well. And it's important to highlight what white dominance means beyond just depicting whites as at individual level mean people. Because when you do that, it's conducive to what we call colorblind racism. So colorblind racism is particularly whites, but it's also been subscribed by other people, but particularly whites, who will say things like, we are all together. Don't you know what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said? We are the world, we are the people. I don't see race. That's my favorite phrase. I don't see race, right? And it's an insult.
Don't get me started on that one, no.
Yeah, exactly. It's an insult because because when you say you don't see race, you're basically pretending that everyone is white, right? Well, first of all, that's also that notion that whiteness is not a racial identity, because there are anti-racists who say we got to get rid of whiteness. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in getting rid of any racial identity, because if you do that, then you're going back to that notion of colorblindness, that white people are just here mysteriously, right? So I think that's important. If we're going to teach children, it has to be a very straightforward way of explaining this and not the la la land way of explaining it. Because even us as Black kids in predominantly Black schools in Richmond, we were showing films like Eyes on the Prize. We were showing Emmett Till, his open casket funeral. We were showing all of that, but it still was not very challenging to the white establishment. Like, they wanted us to learn about ourselves, but they didn't explain to us behind the Ku Klux Klan costumes, who was there? Well, who was there? Police officers, medical doctors, judges, everyday white people. Like, and that's what I highlight when I speak to children about this. This is not about hating white people. This is not about not having white family and white friends. This is about understanding power dynamics. And I always tell people it's impossible to have family and friends and colleagues who have primary power majority identities without them understanding what that means. Like me as an LGBTQIA advocate, my friends who identify as such and are as such hold me 100% accountable as a cisgender heterosexual woman. Never am I allowed as a cisgender heterosexual woman to go into spaces and pretend that I don't understand my privilege and the disparities in power when you're looking at gender identity and sexuality. Never do I go into these spaces and say, I don't know, please teach me. Because they'd be like, well, why are you in our space then? You know, like, this is not our job. You better bounce and learn on your own, right? So it's a similar factor, like even when we're talking about Black LGBTQIA, because I'm a very staunch supporter of Black LGBTQIA, this space is very challenging to Blacks. Like people like George M. Johnson, who I just adore, he'll be honest. He's like, look, I'm a Black man. He said, but you're not going to tell me I have to make Blackness my most important identity while you all are killing our people, right? While you all are killing Black LGBTQIA. So that's that challenging discourse that I think everyone really needs. People have this tendency to think that children are so ditzy and so ignorant that they need baby talk all the time. And by the way, baby talk never expires for whites because whites, until they're like 100 years old, oftentimes think that we have to use baby talk with whites as well. And so I want people to think about this critically. Are you using baby talk with children to explain racial identities and racial experiences for the child's sake or because you yourself are uncomfortable? Because most adults don't know what they're talking about. So I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about, but you're teaching children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the generation after generation of, I'm going to just say it, it's generation after generation of stupidity.
Yeah. Laura, I think you shut Laura up forever.
No, not forever. I'm just taking everything in, and I think that's important. You know, just reflecting on the fact that, you know, to the point of these child-free groups, and like I said, and several people said in comments, you know, they're very toxic. So a lot of us leave these groups. We're like, oh, we've left this group. It was too toxic. We didn't like it. But ultimately, we're complicit because we haven't done anything. We're just leaving these groups and say, so we're reinforcing they are now in this controlled group where they're like, well, white supremacy is still more important because everybody left, all the crybabies, all the people that we don't want left. But that's not serving anyone. That's not serving the community. And I think that that's kind of changed the way I feel about that, not to go into all these child-free groups and suddenly confront everybody, but to rethink the way I'm communicating with people when I'm in those groups. And not just say, all right, fine, then I'm out, you know, and not flounce and, you know, just leave the group, but actually interact with people, because otherwise it's just perpetuating the same cycles over and over again.
Well, you know, the challenge, Kimya, with the NotMom has been the code of conduct that you saw Laura introduce at the beginning. I mean, I personally, when I first, you know, you know the NotMom story. I started it really for myself to ease my own pain. And I was so unaware that there was this mean girl language of calling mothers cows and calling their children crotch fruit, and just these terms that were blowing my mind. Because at the end of the day, almost every woman I know without children, by choice or by chance, has a mom for a really good friend, you know? And it just didn't hit me as right, because I know you wouldn't, you know, it's golden rule time. You wouldn't want somebody to be online talking that way about you. But what the NotMom started as was a way to, and a place to acknowledge that no matter how you wound up in life without motherhood, you have things in common that are hard to share with people outside of that community. And whether you chose to be a mom or you didn't choose to be a mom, you've got some family member, some friend in your business that's not listening to what you're saying about your feelings, that's not acknowledging your own truth, that thinks that they know, oh, if only you would fill in the blank. And you have someone at work who thinks you are able to do more work because you don't have kids. You got the time, you got the this, you got the, and we all have those similarities, even though we come into it thinking there's this wall between child free and childless that cannot be bridged. And I believe strongly it can be bridged. And what Laura and I, and because you were there, what we've learned is when I have these women in a hotel for 3 days, they come in thinking I'm only going to hang with the women just like me. And they leave being forced to see the women on the other side of that wall. And they leave saying, wow, I didn't think I'd find, a woman who was childless by choice or, not like me. And I really liked her. I acknowledged her pain because she was sitting right next to me crying. And you couldn't just click off like you can online. And so it's been sort of difficult not having the summit because now we're back to this online space where people read a headline and go, oh, well, that's not for me. And so they won't even read a story about someone else. And that's only about childlessness versus choice or chance. That has nothing to do with race. Now you add this layer of race onto it. And it's very difficult, again, as we've said, to get people to acknowledge and open up a bit and force themselves to listen to the stuff they didn't really want to hear because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to listen to women who are regretting not having children. And those women will tell me it's uncomfortable listening to women who are kind of like hap because they never wanted kids. Fine, it's not your dance. Exactly. But it doesn't mean I push you out of my life forever. I don't want to know anybody like Kimya because she never wanted children. It's nuts to me. So
yes,
at the end of the day, scholar lady, how do we get these women, Black, white, Native American, with child, without child, how do we, all this bullshit about, especially during COVID, oh my God, one more commercial that says we're all in this together. No, we're not. Some of us
no, we're not.
in Orange County in a mansion with Manuela doing our gardens still and cooking our meals. And some of us are 20 people in our apartment in the middle of the Bronx wondering how to self-distance. So if you could say, just something about, I don't know if you've got any magic answers. I know you don't, but I guess I would love to wrap up our segment with you with some hopeful tip, if for lack of a better word, that would help us going forward. And maybe, knowing that this episode is live right now, but it's going to live on YouTube for some time. What would you what didn't we ask you? What didn't you say? How can we keep helping the world?
Well, thank you so much. So I just always tell people, don't put all of the world on your back. So that's the importance of collaborations. And I also challenge people when they say that we're all in this together, we're all united, because usually that's, again, based on trying to find a power majority focus. And it goes back to like the whole white color blindness, just like men do the same thing. Men will say, we're all in this together. It's based on this. Now we all got to act like men to be accepted. So we have to think about critically, what do we mean by unity? Does unity mean we have to fall into this one definition? Or does unity mean that we are able to still have our own identities and experiences, to still speak out, and for us to find commonalities within our differences? Because humans are wonderful at ignoring differences and saying things like, we have more similar than we have, different, which is not proven. They just say that because that's that whole silencing of differences and struggles. I will say also, remember when I was on the panel at the NotMom, and it was someone who in the audience who made a comment to the effect of, as women, we are all missing out by not having children.
Yeah.
And I had to respond.
I really didn't want you to hop off the stage that day. I didn't have liability coverage. I'm just saying. Yeah.
And Teresa was sitting in the front, so she was like, yeah. I have to respond because if we're talking about unity and collaborating across child-free and childless as well, it can't be based on that falsehood that we are all missing something.
Mm-hmm.
Like even when I read articles that say women who are working, we're all missing out on something, whether you're at home with your kids or working. I just want people to stop that narrative because they don't say that for men. They say that for women. Men can live their life, whatever. But for women, when we make life decisions or we have life circumstances, people want us to live the rest of our lives thinking about what we're missing and to over accommodate to reinforce our womanhood. Like, okay, I'm missing out, so now I gotta just prove I'm a woman every single day. I gotta see a baby walking down the street, but like, hey, baby, I'm a real woman now. That kind of thing. So I want child-free and childless people to stop that as well. And when I still taught the child-free course, my students were really looking forward to going to the next NotMom Summit. So they were really feeling some type of way about Karen and Laura when it wouldn't happen. So they were like, Karen and Laura, what's going on? But I explained to the students, I said, I commend Laura and Karen for doing this because it's a very complicated summit to bring all these people together. And some people don't really know what the common ground is. Like, even if they know not having children is the common ground, there were a couple of people who said they might still have children one day. So for some, which is okay, but I will tell you, for some child-free people, it makes it difficult to find if we really are united.
Well,
because
I got to interrupt and ask a question then.
One
of the things, again, that I never saw coming was the anger among a number of child-free by choice women toward what I call childless stepmoms.
Mm-hmm.
Women who wanted children, never gave birth to a child of their own, married a person who had full custody of that child, and became a stepmom.
Yeah.
And to the this child-free group who responded very angrily to Laura and I, to them, well, then she's not child-free because she would never have fallen in love with him. She would have said from the start, I can't stand children.
See, that's their narrative. That doesn't have to apply to everybody else.
My answer was, then you've never been in love. Because what you think you're going to do, and then, you do what I don't know.
Well, I also can speak from experience that being with somebody who's raising a child by him or herself does not mean that you're helping to raise a child.
Yeah, well, it was.
So that's
the full custody part was, what tipped them.
Well, again, even somebody having full custody does not mean that you're helping to raise a child. People understand this when we're talking about men, because people are accustomed to women raising children by themselves, even when the men are in the household, right?
Yeah.
Men come and they take out the trash. But when it comes to discussing women, yeah, it's true, right? Like, men, even when they're there, men are expected to be part-time parents. But when it comes to women, they have this image of women not being able to exist in a household with a child without now you're breastfeeding, And so that's another gendered assumption. It's not based on what's really happening. It's based on this falsehood that women cannot coexist in environments, even entire households with children, without being the child raiser, And I want child-free people to challenge that, because their intent to hold on to that falsehood that being a woman around children means that you're now, you singing a la-la, a baby, a song to go to bed. Like, that's that gendered assumption on their part. Mm-hmm. And that's oftentimes because they want there to be one definition of being child-free. And on one end, I can understand that, because child-free, we're always told that one day we'll change our mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when we have women in particular in our environments and I have some women who I knew who they kept telling me for years, there's 3 of them, for years they were like, I'm child-free just like you are. Can I participate in your research? I says, no. They're like, why not? And now they have babies. So that's why. I mean, we're told that. So thankfully I had a gynecologist who did not give me bingos, but most women do. And especially when you put race into it, like Black and brown women especially are even less likely to have family and medical providers who understand what it means to say no to parenthood. So if we're going to have that unity, it has to be not attacking each other while also having honest dialogue of how each side has some messed up assumptions of the other side.
Right.
Well, please tell your students and friends and anybody else. Laura and I would love to have another summit, but it took my husband and I going into our retirement to make that. So the number one thing is trying to get major brands who understand that women without children have more disposable income, are educated, have more pets. I mean, on and on down the line. They know the
We're still broke. Some of us are still broke, but yeah, we have some.
Well, the bottom line is they understand we are a viable and growing global market. They know this. The ad agencies know it, but they are so afraid of alienating the mom market, which of course is greater. That and last but not least, of course, Laura and I are the staff. So,
right.
We even when I paid for a professional salesperson, it just is so difficult to get them to really invest in what we were trying to do at the summit. And I will tell you how many women I hear who, desperately wanted to come back or they didn't get to go. And Laura and I have talked about maybe having it online with the virus, but that ain't no fun.
No, we want it in person. So I will help however possible. I remember last year, Laura and we tagged the people who made the menstrual cup. Remember that? We had tagged them on Twitter or something. They didn't respond, of course. But whatever.
It was good try.
We tried. But these are ways that if we want to get childless and child-free people's insight and opinions on this, we got to let them know that this is not a war we're fighting. This is actually, we're going to combine our resources because child-free and childless people have a lot of access to resources from their employer and all sorts of stuff. So this is something that we could definitely do. And we could talk about issues like gender justice, sexuality justice, racial justice, religion, all these things that factor into reproductive choices so that people understand that the NotMom Summit is kind of like a combination of all these different conferences that people go to every year for their profession. It's just more awesome. It's just more awesome.
It is more awesome. For one thing, nobody's going to ask you if you have kids.
The next thing are the pet moms. It's a relief. Now it's like the pet mom. People are like, do you have a dog? I'm like, I love dogs. I don't have one. What's wrong with you? I'm like, Dad, come on, y'all. Unity. I don't have no dog because I don't want to clean up any poop, including dog poop.
Nobody, human or animal or otherwise.
As we wrap up, you may get some emails from our listeners, Kimya.
Okay. You may, because I'm about to put your contact info up on the screen here so that people can see that.
Yay.
So yes, check out 365 Diversity LLC. You can email Kimya. You can call her. You can visit her website. So that is her info.
And Laura, I think do we have information up so that if anybody has some magical rich friends or contacts, they can let us know, and maybe we'll get a summit going in 2021.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes,
we welcome all information.
All information and money.
Yes, bring back the summit. I'm here for it. Please let me know what I can do to help Karen and Laura.
Awesome.
Kimya, you were the best guest ever. Well, I'm sorry, Maxine, you were the best guest, that month.
You're the best guest last week. Kimya is the best guest this week.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, if anyone's mad about what I said about whites, do not call me, do not email me, because all I do, I will put you on blast on Twitter. So don't do that to yourself. I don't allow white people to stalk me. So don't try that.
That's a very good policy. So, all right. Thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Kimya Dennis. We are so glad that you are a friend of the NotMom and that you spent your Sunday afternoon with us.
Much love. Much love.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye, Laura.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining in.
Bye, everybody.